This video is brought to you by Loot Crate. Head today to lootcrate.com/reviewtechusa and enter the code RTU to save 10% on any subscription plan. Skip it up and that up. So Adam Koralik over at Figure It Out Productions, really cool guy. I'll have a link to his channel below in the description. He had up an interesting video, and I'm looking at the title now if you hear my mouse click, and it's "Why Isn't Nintendo Hardware Powerful?" Here's why. Again, if you want to see his video, I'll have a link below in the description. Now, I'm going to give two disclaimers here. One, I don't agree with him. And two, just because I don't agree with someone doesn't mean I lose any respect for them, or I'm against them, or I'm their enemy. It just means that I don't agree with them. I think Adam's a great guy. I've talked to him all the time on Facebook about retro gaming. Very, 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 very cool dude. Just because I don't agree with him on this topic doesn't mean that we are enemies. Because a lot of you older than me and younger than me, which is kind of surprising and disturbing, think when you don't agree with someone, it means you're declaring war with them. Which, if that's how you treat the real world and treat life, God help you. But anyway, beyond that, I always like to give that disclaimer because people just go off the deep end. I don't agree with his video at all. Now, because Nintendo, he basically, in his video, okay, let me start off with that before I just jump the gun here. He says that Nintendo has always been about anemic hardware and has been about the games. And you could go, like I said, watch his video. There's obviously his video is 15 minutes long. There's obviously more to it than that, but that's in a nutshell, that's what the video is about. And he's saying that Nintendo throughout history was never, top dog with hardware. And that's pretty much, at least on the home console side, not true. Now, Gunpei Yokoi, the guy who created the Game Boy, his philosophy was you use off-the-shelf parts, you make cheaper, more affordable hardware, and even if it's a step behind your competition because you're more affordable, it'll be more appealing to people and more people will buy it, and then you'll have a bigger install base, which means you'll get more games made for it, and more games will appeal to more people. And you know what? The guy was right. The Game Boy was legendary and was huge and sold a ton of units. But when it comes to the home console side, Nintendo really, until the Wii, was all about powerful hardware too. I mean, let's think back to the original Nintendo, the NES, which was based on the Famicom from Japan, which was released in 1983 in Japan. The original NES was revolutionary hardware-wise, and I'm not talking about Rob the Robot and the gun and all that shit. I mean, having scrolling backgrounds, having multiple levels, having quests, and all these different things in games were unheard of because of the hardware limitations of other systems like Atari and ColecoVision and etc., etc. So Nintendo, the original NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, was leaps and bounds ahead of its competition. Now, obviously, it had competitors like the Sega Master System that dwarfed it because the Sega Master System came out years later. But Nintendo, the original NES, was all about hardware too. I mean, it was ahead of anything else, and because of its hardware, it created revolutionary games like Zelda, and I even remember like Kung Fu being a big deal. I got my NES. I was one of the first guys to have one, and I got Kung Fu with it, and it blew my mind as a little kid to see scrolling backgrounds and characters actually looked like humans and all that stuff. I mean, it sounds dumb and it sounds like I'm really trying to reach here, but no, you got to realize I was coming from the Atari, even the 7800, even I had the ColecoVision, the Atari 2600, the NES was leaps and bounds above them, so yeah, the NES was all about hardware too, and it was because of the hardware that they innovated and created games like Zelda and Mario and so on and so forth. You couldn't see games like that on systems before the NES. So yeah, the NES for its time had powerful hardware, and it was because of that quote-unquote powerful hardware for the mid-80s that we saw some kick-ass games. Now, when you go on to the SNES, now Adam said the only reason the SNES was more powerful is because it came out a couple years after the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive, and okay, he has a point there to a degree, but Nintendo there's two theories I have with that, I should say. One, Nintendo marketed the crap out of their hardware. Now you're playing with power, super power. I remember one of the first Super Nintendo commercials being like, oh, Mario's more this because of 16 bits, and now he's 3D because of 16 bits, and you could do this because of 16 bits. You guys who are nerds like me, you probably saw that commercial. It was one of the first Super NES commercials in the States. And yeah, it was all, the Super NES was all about the hardware too. All the heavy competition between Sega and Nintendo. Both companies always pushed their hardware in the commercials. Yes, again, I understand what Adam's saying, that 2 years in the technology world is a very long time. But if Nintendo had that, software first, hardware second philosophy back then, they still could have picked cheaper parts and made the SNES just on par with the Sega Genesis, or maybe even a slight step below, and made the system cheaper. But they decided not to. They used Sony's sound chip, which made the Super Nintendo have legendary sound for its time. A lot of the soundtracks still hold up well to this day. They decided to go with more colors on screen with a more advanced GPU. Not getting super nerdy for you guys who don't really care too much about the tech side of it, but yeah, they could have still, even with the SNES coming out years later, still skimped on hardware, made the system a little cheaper, and, just said, hey, we're going to be right on the same level as the Genesis. But they didn't, because they wanted to impress people with the hardware and the visuals that the SNES was able to create. And let's admit, the SNES is one of my favorite systems of all time. Now let's move on to the N64. And my God, they were all about graphics and hardware, how they worked with Silicon Graphics Incorporated, and they were going to have, smoother textures with no pixelization, and you would see commercials on TV, we're the most powerful system of this generation. It was, the N64 was all about power. What Nintendo did dumb, and that's honestly what hurt them throughout the years. What they did dumb was they used cartridges with the N64. And what I mean by what they did dumb, let me say that because I kind of screwed up how I said that, is they always do one thing that just makes people facepalm. And that thing with the N64 compared to the original Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn, but the Sega Saturn had its own issues, is they didn't use optical medium. They used cartridges, and that killed developers because there wasn't enough room. It was expensive to manufacture the cartridges, and a lot of them just threw their hands up and went over to Sony because it was just too much of a pain in the ass to develop games and try to shoehorn them onto the limited memory in cartridges at the time. But beyond that fact, that's what hurt the N64. Nintendo was all about the power back then too. They were the most powerful system of that generation. That was their thing, and every time they had a commercial or when they showed off their hardware before it was released, before the N64 was released, I mean to say, they let you know, we're the most powerful hardware, we're working with Silicon Graphics, we use Z buffering, and we look beautiful, and Mario looks better than he ever has. And that Nintendo, you understand what I'm saying? I know I sound like a broken record, but I'm trying to prove my point and go against what Adam was saying, is that Nintendo always tried to keep up with the Joneses with their hardware. Now let's move on to the GameCube, and it pretty much was the same thing, except again, what hurt them was they made dumbass choices. I'll explain what I'm talking about. Now when you move on to the sixth generation of gaming, the original Xbox, the GameCube, and the PS2, the GameCube is actually more powerful than the PlayStation 2. It was behind the Xbox. The original Xbox, can't say Xbox One because they used that for their 8th generation console name, facepalm, hardcore, but the GameCube was a powerful system. It was more powerful than the most dominant system of the 6th generation, which was the PlayStation 2, but it had very capable hardware. What killed the GameCube, or at least it didn't sell anywhere near what Nintendo wanted it to, was they made dumbass choices with the system again, using those tiny discs that only held a gigabyte of data each, or approximately around about a gigabyte. I could be wrong. I know it wasn't anywhere near what a DVD was. They didn't use DVDs for the GameCube. They used those small discs, and their excuse was, even though Nintendo finally reluctantly went over to an optical medium finally, was to prevent piracy, which I'm sure to a degree it did, but it pissed off developers royally because, again, it was space issues. When they wanted to make a 6 gigabyte game, they would have to use multiple disks, or they would have to compress the crap out of the data to squeeze it onto a couple GameCube discs or one GameCube disc. So that turned developers off. On top of it, too, Nintendo didn't embrace online gaming the way Sony and especially Microsoft did. Sony was lukewarm. They had the network adapter you could use. And their online game, I remember playing Killzone a lot back then. That was okay. But Microsoft, with the original Xbox Live, killed it. They really brought online gaming to the forefront. Nintendo didn't do jack shit. They only had a couple games. They had an Ethernet adapter. They had a couple games, and they really didn't focus on it at all. Hell, Nintendo to this day, they're still playing catch up when it comes to online gaming and network gaming and online in general. Nintendo's still playing catch up. So it wasn't, again, that the hardware wasn't capable. It wasn't that they weren't trying to keep up with Sony and Microsoft, because they sure as shit were. They were actually more powerful, like I said, than Sony's console. They just, again, made dumb choices with the hardware. And the appearance of the GameCube turned off older adult gamers. It looked like a kiddie lunchbox. Let's be real here. The original purple GameCube with a handle made people cringe. So combine all that together, capable hardware or not, that's what hurt Nintendo in the 6th generation. You see what I'm saying? Nintendo always had the capable hardware, really until the Wii, like I said in the beginning of this video. They just made a bunch of dumbass choices. And then with the Wii, they finally said, you know what? Let's not keep up with our competition. Let's go a different route. Okay, it kind of worked, but it worked because they got lucky at the time. They got lucky because tablets and smartphones weren't big yet. So they picked up a lot of that casual market, and that's why the Wii was so popular. So, Adam, if you really think about it, Nintendo's always been about powerful hardware. They've always been about trying to keep up with their competition. They just made dumbass choices that they couldn't keep up, and it turned people off to their systems. That's really what it was. Nintendo's never had like a true fail. I guess the closest ever to a failure, well, maybe right now you could say the Wii U is their poorest selling system. But the closest they ever had to a failure besides the Wii U, which the Wii U in the long run may do okay, is the GameCube. So Nintendo's never fallen flat on their face, minus the Virtual Boy, but that's a different video. So it has never really destroyed Nintendo, but they've made stupid decisions. Hardware-wise, on the home console market, they've definitely tried to keep up with their competitors when it comes to graphics and visuals and hardware, but they made dumb choices outside of that hurt them. And then they finally just threw up their hands with the Wii and said, let's go a different route and let's appeal to a different market. That's really what happened, Adam. Now, it's funny because when it comes to the Wii U, I'm in the same boat as Adam is. I love the Wii U. I think it's a fantastic system. I couldn't stand the Wii. I really wish, I would have loved to see Nintendo make a comeback with the Wii U in terms of getting third-party support. But now I don't think that's going to happen the way Nintendo wanted it to. But what he said, the other thing I'm kind of mixed on, I don't totally disagree with him and totally agree with him, is he thinks that Nintendo may be the only competitor who makes a true next-gen dedicated gaming console. Like he said, Sony may go the PlayStation Now route, and PlayStation 5 may just be a streaming box. That is a possibility, but I think I was really in that direction like a few months back. Like, yeah, there's going to be no next-gen system, or if Sony and Microsoft do make a next-gen system, it's just going to be about streaming. But I think Sony and developers, third party and first party, are realizing, yeah, there's no way these systems, these 8th gen boxes can last a decade. We're already tapping out and maxing out the PS4 and Xbox One as it is. They're not lasting another 8 or 9 years. So I think there is a chance now, a decent chance, we will see like a true console from Microsoft and Sony, a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox 3.7.12518, whatever the hell they want to name it. So I think the chances have increased substantially that we may see a true next-gen system from Sony and Microsoft. But we'll have to wait and see. Maybe I'm wrong. All right, folks, this is Rich of Review Tech USA. Make sure to rate, comment, favorite, and subscribe. And as always, thank you for supporting my channel. Have a good one. The preceding video was brought to you by Big Cheese's YouTube channel. For gameplay reviews, gaming music, and vlogs, subscribe to Big Cheese VG. Link below in the description.